From CPRE and the CPRE Knowledge Hub, this is Research Minutes, a weekly look at new and important research in education. Today we look at federal childcare subsidies and their potential impact on a student's academic performance and behavior in middle school.
We found that if the kids are exposed early on to center-based childcare programs, there are positive effects both in reading and math test scores, and effects that are sustained through time, so they last up until the 8th grade.
We welcome Wladimir Zanoni, consultant with the Inter-American Development Bank and co-author of a new study examining the influence of those subsidies utilized by hundreds of thousands of low-income families across the U.S. Zanoni joined CPRE Knowledge Hub managing editor Keith Heumiller to discuss his findings and some important implications for early childhood policy and future research.
I think that we have underestimated the power of licensed home care. So home care provided for families, if they're well structured and supervised and they have some kind of standards, it's possible that we can exploit the potential of this type of arrangement to foster child development among low-income working families.
That's right now on Research Minutes.
Hello and welcome to Research Minutes. I'm Keith Heumiller, managing editor of the CPRE Knowledge Hub. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Wladimir Zanoni, former researcher with the University of Chicago and currently a consultant with IDB. So thanks so much for joining us, Wladimir.
Thank you so much, Keith, for this invitation.
So today we're discussing your new article, which you co-authored with Georgetown University's Anna Johnson, titled Childcare Subsidy Use and Children's Outcomes in Middle School. It was recently published in AERA Open, and it examines the academic impacts of the Childcare Development Fund, or CCDF, which is a federal program that provides childcare subsidies for low-income families across the U.S. To start, could you give us some background on the CCDF? How does it operate, and how many children does it serve?
Yeah, sure. So I would like to say that what I'm going to express are my own opinions about the Childcare Subsidy program, and I'm going to state the conclusions and findings of my job. But this is not the view of my current employer, which is the IDB, or Chapin Hall. These are my own opinions, okay? To give you a little bit of historic background on the program, it was created during welfare reform, actually as a component of welfare reform in 1997, in order to support the welfare to work policy. They started issuing childcare subsidies so that low-income working parents could have some subsidy that would allow them to place their kids in childcare while they were working. The program serves in all the states, in the 50 states of the Union. In terms of eligibility, parents who are going to use this subsidy have to be employed. They also have to be below certain income thresholds. So there is an income eligibility. This is what is called a means-tested program. The parents they can decide what type of childcare program they will choose. And according to that, they will receive some funds. What happens is that the federal government gives appropriations for this program. And then it's passed to the states who administer that. But the states also match funds from their own funding. And the program is administered at the local level for the so-called resource and referral agencies, which are independent agencies that, on behalf of the states, work on determining the eligibility of parents for the programs, administering the funds, and the practical operations of the programs. The states can shape within the eligibility requirements and within certain rules for allocations how they craft the program itself. And then you have at the local level these agencies that administer it. The other players in this infrastructure, let's call it that way, are the childcare providers. So the providers receive the funding ultimately, and they do so either in grants that are given to them directly as big grants or contract with them, or they receive vouchers, which are, for the most part, the way they get funded. So the vouchers are basically money that is paid to the providers on behalf of the children whose parents have applied for these subsidies. And the providers are not only centers. You have home-based care, some of which is licensed, some of which is not. And then you might also pay for your own relatives to take care of children in certain states, like in the state of Illinois, that's the case, and in some other states it's like that. In terms of operations, parents have to be employed in order to apply for this subsidy. So basically what they do is that they apply through the resource and referral agencies. They send all paperwork about their employment, and then these agencies determine eligibility of the parents and then administer the payments. It varies with the number of children that you have under the subsidy. It varies with your income, and it has an associated co-payment. So parents have to co-pay with the subsidy to afford the childcare they are aiming for. In terms of the number of children that use this program on a monthly basis, so on average, it's about 1.3 million children. This joins nearly 800,000 families across the country. 45% of these families are below the federal poverty line, which is currently nearly $20,000. And you have 30% of them who are between 100 and 150% of the federal poverty line. About a third of the children who benefit from this program are less than 3 years old. You have around another 28% of the children who are ages 3 to 4. And the rest is children that are older, because the subsidy, by the way, covers from 0 to 13 years old. It's not only dedicated to early childhood years, despite the fact that our research focuses on those years.
What was it that led you to conduct this study? Were there specific questions that you had about these subsidies, or were there gaps in prior research that you were hoping to fill?
Well, this might be unusual, but I'm going to throw a personal note on this. I came to the United States with a Fulbright scholarship as a grad student. And during my grad studies, my first son was born. And I was a student at the University of Chicago, receiving a stipend, and I was married. And I clearly was a low-income student. And then I qualified for childcare subsidies. We really needed. And then I went ahead and applied. For a very brief span of time, I was a beneficiary of the CCDF program myself. So as a social researcher, it raised my interest in the program. That combined with the fact that I took classes with Professor Jim Heckman and the late Professor Gary Becker at the University of Chicago about the importance of investing in human capital and how important it is to make those investments early on in the lives of children. So these two things sort of really make me interested in the program. Just to find that, how little we have researched in terms of the impact that this program has on child development. So those two things really made me very, very interested in this topic. To that, I also have to say that during the summer of 2007, I was an intern at Chapin Hall at the University of Chicago, where I really discovered that Professor Robert Gorga had been working for almost 25 years, compiling administrative records from the state of Illinois in the multiplicity of social programs that the state provides. And Chapin Hall was some kind of a stewardship of data. And this was really, for a researcher that had acquired tools for quantitative analysis, this was very much like a candy store, ready and open to advance research. So my dissertation actually focused on studying the short-term outcomes of the Childcare Subsidy program on child development. And I also studied the effects of the program on parental employment. And more recently, with my colleague Anna Johnson from Georgetown University, we applied and got a grant from the Administration for Children and Families, who gave us the opportunity to advance research following longer-term outcomes. My research had stopped at grade 3, and with this research, we really are investigating longer-term outcomes up to the 8th grade, and also adding something that hasn't been researched before, which is a behavioral dimension of outcomes, in this case, the school absences.
So in this work, you drew from a unique database that was offering a wide range of information, not only on children, but their families and their public school outcomes. Could you just give us a general overview of the scope of this study and how you approached this work?
So basically, what we did was to link children whose records we had, and then we linked those records across databases. The first database we looked at was the Chicago Public Schools database. So we could identify children in 3rd grade in the school year 2008-2009. And then we retrospectively matched them to a series of databases, including the SNAP and TANF, databases, and also where we could see participation in these two programs throughout their lives, the lives of the children, even before they were born, because we were able to match children with parents using these databases. And we could see, their income levels and whether they were participating in food stamps and welfare, TANF, before joining the subsidy, and after doing so too. Because we knew where these children were living, the databases provided us information with addresses. Then we could link these addresses to geographic aggregates that are provided by the American Community Survey, so that the geographies where these kids live, we could control for attributes like the median income, level of inequality, level of education of parents. We knew trajectories of participation in welfare and food stamp programs before and after the birth of the children, and all that we could relate to later on outcomes in Chicago public schools. So we could see these kids' performance, academic performance, and also their school absences during the years we did this. So basically up until school year 2013-2014. So in that sense, this is pretty unique. And I was very fortunate, we were very fortunate to have access to this information. I think that, in part, some of the contributions of this paper have to show a little bit what can be done when agencies cooperate to share data to evaluate social progress.
So you and Anna Johnson uncovered some notable findings regarding the use of these subsidies, including positive future outcomes in math, reading, and school absences. Could you walk us through your findings?
Sure, absolutely. So the literature on early childhood education, the one that evaluates the Childcare Subsidy program, have found that the effects are basically either negative or negligible. There are no effects of children being exposed to subsidized programs with childcare development funds. There are basically no effects on test scores, either math or reading test scores. And we found the same, the literature so far had done this up until the third grade. And we found the same. On average, there are no effects. However, when you analyze specifically the type of childcare to which the children were more exposed to, you find differences. More specifically, if the kid went to a center-based childcare program during the early childhood years, then we find a positive association with test scores. So while on average you might find no effects, we found that if the kids are exposed early on to center-based childcare programs, there are positive effects both in reading and math test scores, and effects that are sustained through time, so they last up until the 8th grade. I think that this is something new, and it talks about the differences in quality across the multiplicity of arrangements that parents can use to place their kids while they are working. And we're talking here, it's important to highlight that we're talking here about very, very low-income families. We're talking here about families who participated in food stamps, or they were participating in TANF programs, so welfare or food stamps. So for those families we analyze, you find that their kids might get a benefit in terms of, let's say, academic performance during grades 3rd to 8th if they are exposed early on to center-based care. And we attribute that to higher quality. These centers are more regulated, they have certain quality standards that they have to follow, and often, and this is something that is unique about the Childcare Subsidy program, the centers to which children go interact with the two other major programs, which are the state-funded pre-K and the Head Start programs. So picture a provider who that is a center, and then they provide services to low-income children who can really not afford to pay the full cost of it. So in order to fund those services, they gather funds from a multiplicity of programs. So a center can receive Head Start funding directly from the federal government if they apply and receive it. They might also receive some funding from the state-funded pre-K programs, because some of these programs at the local level are interested in fostering the development of children before the kids go to school. At the same time, they can also receive CCDF funding. So associated to each one of these funding streams, there is a series of regulations. The Head Start has some very, very stringent regulations about structural aspects of quality and caregiver-student ratio, and the state-funded pre-K programs have a lot of regulations as well. in terms of physical space, how to use a space. And the CCDF has its own, no? So a center base that is a provider is nested within a set of regulations that are kind of crafted and designed to improve the quality of care that children receive. And we think that this is what is happening. This is why we think, because of these higher quality standards that center-based programs are subject to, that's why we think we see persistent effects on test scores. I want to highlight that, we were a little bit impressed about the fact that we also saw positive effects in home-based care. And this is something that is interesting, because the type of home-based care in which we saw positive effects is home-based care that is licensed by the state. In the state of Illinois has regulations also for home-based care, and there is somehow an incentive structure. If you get this license, you might get access to higher funds and you get some benefits, but you get nested within a series of regulations and you receive periodic visits and the like. So what we think is that, what is happening with home-based care is that it enables for parents, with very unconventional schedules of work, it enables some flexibility that somehow gets passed through child development. So we think that really this is an opportunity to explore avenues for research, because a well-structured home-based care might serve the demands of parents who do not work from 9 to 5, and at the same time serve the cognitively do not affect the children. No? So this is interesting. Now, what we think is the most remarkable finding of our research is the fact that, it's been studied that behavioral effects of early childhood programs you don't see them very early on when you measure the effects of the programs. However, they resurface later on, and there are several hypotheses why would this be the case. So school absences in our research are conceptualized as to try to understand whether the Childcare Subsidy program is affecting the non-cognitive aspects of behavior in children. We didn't find effects in the early years of schools, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. But, after 7 and 8, these effects resurface, and we find that, in fact, the kids who were exposed to almost any kind of childcare subsidy program during early childhood show less absenteeism than observational equivalent kids. It's just to say that in the counterfactual state, they would have been more prone to be absent. But because they went to and were exposed to childcare programs funded by the CCDF, we did find that they have now less school absenteeism. It's precisely in the 8th grade when we see it. And one of the mechanisms you can think about that drive those effects have to do with the development of agency in children. In general, kids develop agency as they age. So by the 8th grade, they have certain leverage to act on the absences behavior. And we think that, by the time it is revealed, this agency is revealed in the 8th grade, they actually exercise this agency. And in fact, we find effects. So whenever the children are mature enough as to have some degree of control over behavioral dimensions, in this case absences, you see effects. In our opinion, this is a remarkable finding. It's pretty interesting, and it talks about the kind of hidden nature of the early childhood programs. Most of the research done on these programs has focused specifically on test scores and has focused on cognitive development, while we are finding that the most robust effects are not there, but on this specific dimension of non-cognitive skills, which is portrayed by school absenteeism.
So you've already touched on this a little bit, but I'd be curious to know what you think the implications are here, particularly given the increasing focus that we're seeing from the local to the national level on early childhood development. So why do you think subsidies have this level of impact, and what should policymakers and other stakeholders take away from your work?
So we have this notion that childcare programs that are of high quality are good for kids, especially for low-income children, And so I would say there are a few implications. So the first one is that we have underestimated the power of licensed home care. So home care provided for families. More and more, the work schedules of low-income families are becoming unconventional. We did some work with the National Survey of Early Care and Education where we really find that, low-income families have unconventional schedules. And center-based care do not fit their needs. Center-based care has a structure, 9 to 5 or 9 to 7 or 7 to 7 schedules. But some people work on weekends or they work at night and they need some support. And licensed home-based care might be an alternative to, pair the needs of parents in terms of work. And at the same time, if they're well-structured and supervised and they have some kind of standards, it's possible that we can exploit the potential of this type of arrangement to foster child development among low-income working families. So I would also say that one of the implications is possibly the case that the effects that we find in center-based care are driven by these heavy interactions that the CCDF program has at the provider level with these other programs like the state-funded pre-K and the Head Start program. I think that it's important. These three programs are still in silos. They have their own objectives. The CCDF program was created, as I said at the beginning, to foster parental employment. The emphasis of the program was not necessarily on fostering child development. It's not to say that it was designed to harm children at all, yet it didn't have a strong focus on children quality up until 2014 when the provisions for funding were increased to sort of, pay attention to the quality dimension. I think that, it's important to work in trying to provide an homogeneous structure to the provision of childcare that allowing the differences across the programs. The Head Start program has a completely different meaning. It was created in the 50s as an anti-poverty program, and then it's interacting today with the Childcare Subsidy program, which was created to foster parental employment. And state-funded pre-K has a different objective. In the core of its objectives, they're seeking child development, but they're also trying to facilitate the fact that when kids get to school, they are ready, and it's easier for the school system to sort of address their needs. So I think that, it's important to think about the implications that we have to have a very simple and straightforward way of doing provision of childcare, which many states have been working on. The state of Illinois, to begin with, has been very active in trying to homogenize criteria for quality, set standards and the like. No, I also think, the impact that we find on absences, when kids don't go to school, then they don't receive the instruction that you have received. At the same time, absences, portray behavior. And it has been found that school absences are a very, very strong predictor of later life outcomes. So kids who in 8th grade have a lot of school absenteeism are kids who you can predict will not do very well in school and will have subsequent problems. Even, it's been related to earnings and wages later on and health outcomes. So in a way, using the school absenteeism to proxy future behavior in this research allows us to say, that if the kids are doing better in terms of absences, the impacts that will come from being exposed to early childhood programs during early childhood is going to be long-lasting. No? There is an issue here because in this research, we mostly focus on the effects on children. But, in as much as there is a claim that this program supports parental employment, the extent to which the returns to experience associated to parents participating in the labor market, subsidized somehow so that they can place their kids in childcare programs, is still out. So I think that, it's still to be seen whether social mobility has been promoted for the generation of parents who apply and use this program. And it seems to be the case that for the second generation, it might be very effective, but, we also want to have a program that sort of impacts both generations. This is what is called a two-generation program. You have the first generation, the parents who are using the subsidy to go to work, and then you want to try to promote upward social mobility through employment. It's not clear that this is happening. Despite the fact that they are working, it's not clear that there is upward social mobility there. While on the other hand, for the second generation, you are having positive effects on somehow cognition and also, behavior that is guaranteeing that the kids might eventually move out of the poverty trap. So we want to balance these two objectives so as to, guarantee that the program is benefiting the two generations.
And my final question is, do you think there are opportunities here for future research, either for you or for others who are working in this area?
Absolutely, yes. This is actually an area of research that is in its infancy, I would say. We know very little about the mechanisms that drive these associations that we found in this study. I think that studying a broader set of outcomes would be of interest. The CCDF program is relatively new compared to state-funded pre-K and Head Start. It has 22 years. It was created in 1997. But as these kids get older and older, we can do more to try to understand how the program through time has been affecting them, So the kids who were, let's say, 3 years old in 1997, today are entering the labor market and kind of finishing their basic educational trajectories, if they went to college and all that. So they are starting to mature into the labor market. So labor market outcomes, health outcomes, incarceration. So there is a multiplicity of dimensions of behavior and results in life that can already be investigated. Of course, this requires an enormous degree of collaboration across agencies in different states in order for researchers to be able to exploit these dimensions. I also think that there is, as I said a little bit, there is a space for looking at whether there are differential effects on whether the kids enter the program at very early ages as opposed to later ages. And by that, I mean, before the age of 3, kids are still working in developing language. And there is some hypothesis according to which being exposed to these programs early on might be more beneficial than later on. We don't know much about that. I mean, we can extrapolate about other programs, but the interesting aspect of the CCDF is that it's unique on the fact that parents have to be employed, because you have to make a joint choice of going to work, choosing to use the Childcare Subsidy program, within the Childcare Subsidy program, deciding what type of childcare you will use. It's not the same thing as saying, okay, I'm gonna enroll my kid in this Head Start program, which is within my neighborhood. It's a different process, and then modeling it and understanding the implications of those choices requires dedicated work. So I see a lot of avenues for future research in trying to understand multiplicity of dimensions along this line. Of course, we as researchers, we hope that states become more and more interested in providing evidence of the impacts of their programs, and at the same time, open windows of opportunity that by taking care of the privacy of the families and being very serious about the identifying information of people, allow researchers to go about investigating how is the CCDF program affecting the lives of children and families.
Well, Wladimir, this is incredible work, and I would encourage all of our listeners to go and read the full article. Again, it's titled Childcare Subsidy Use and Children's Outcomes in Middle School, and it was recently published in AERA Open. Wladimir Zanoni, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to this week's Research Minutes, presented by the CPRE Knowledge Hub. For more episodes of this podcast, or to subscribe to this series, visit us at researchminutes.org. To share thoughts on today's episode, or to suggest future topics, follow us on Twitter at CPRE Hub. That's CPRE Hub.